Ibrahim Traoré was the son of a gold mine worker. His father died in an explosion at a mine run by a French company. The company never took responsibility, and the family got nothing, not even a word from the Burkina Faso government. 30 years later, Traoré returned to that same mine, but now as the president of the country. As the French manager proudly talked about production numbers, Traoré asked him just one question: how much do you pay Burkina Faso when you take 1 ton of gold from our land? The manager replied, 2 million francs. Traoré shook his head and calmly said, you're wrong. The amount is now 0, because you're not staying here anymore. A week later, Burkina Faso made its boldest decision in history. Western powers were angry. But they had no idea that Traoré had been planning this move for a long time. Under the burning sun at the Bissa gold mine, 100 kilometers north of Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of his simple car. He refused both the umbrella and the help offered to him. The executives of Nordgold, a French-Canadian company that had been running the mine for nearly 40 years, stood waiting, nervous and unsure. Mr. President, welcome to Bissa, said Philippe Marot, the French director of the mine, holding out his hand. We're honored by your visit. Traoré shook his hand firmly, his face unreadable. Thank you, Director Marot. I've been wanting to see this place myself. His tone made the executives uneasy. This didn't feel like a normal visit. As they walked toward the main facility, Marot began his usual speech. We employ over 1,200 local workers and have invested 430 million euros since 2008. Traoré nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on the huge open-pit mine in front of him, massive machines digging deep into the earth. And how much gold do you produce each year? Traoré asked. Marot smiled, happy to share. Last year was our best. We extracted 3 tons of gold. That's worth about 720 million euros. They reached a platform overlooking the processing plant, where the gold ore was being crushed and mixed with cyanide to separate the gold. Below, workers moved around like tiny dots among giant machines. Traoré stood quietly, watching. Then he asked the question that would be remembered across Africa: and how much does Burkina Faso get for each ton of gold you take from our land? Marot paused, clearly uneasy. We pay all taxes and fees as per the contract, around 2 million CFA francs per ton, plus local employment benefits. Now Traoré turned to him, calm but firm. 2 million francs for something worth 60 million. That's just 3%. That's not right. Then Traoré looked at Director Marot and asked, would France ever accept such a deal for its own resources? Before Marot could reply, Traoré continued, this mine is where my father died, 30 years ago. There was an explosion in Tunnel 6. 23 workers were killed. None of their families received any compensation. I was just 7 years old. The words hung heavy in the air. Marot shifted uncomfortably. Mr. President, I had no idea. That was before our current management. We now have a strong safety record. But Traoré raised his hand, stopping him. I'm not here to talk about the past, Director. I came to tell you about the future. He turned to look over the mine again. His mind was already made up. Your company has 30 days to leave Burkina Faso. The contract is cancelled. Marot's face went pale. Mr. President, you can't do this. Our contract runs until 2040. There are international agreements that protect us. Traoré's voice stayed calm. Then 60 days. Out of respect for the time needed to wind things down. But on day 61, this mine will belong fully to the people of Burkina Faso. Without waiting for a reply, Traoré walked back to his car, leaving the stunned executives behind. That same evening, Marot was making desperate phone calls to Paris and Ottawa. By the next morning, both the French Foreign Ministry and the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs were demanding emergency meetings with their ambassadors in Burkina Faso. But none of them understood yet, Traoré's visit to the Bissa mine wasn't random. It was the first public step in a plan that had been in the works for years. Just 7 days later, President Ibrahim Traoré addressed the nation from the presidential palace. The speech was short, clear, and historic. For too long, the gold under our soil has made foreign companies rich while our people stay poor. Today, we take back what's rightfully ours. All foreign mining operations in Burkina Faso are now nationalized, effective immediately. He explained there would be a 60-day transition period. Foreign companies could take their people out, but not their equipment. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation, he said firmly. This is our right as a free nation. The era of resource colonialism is over. Within hours, the world reacted. Western media called it economic suicide and a radical move. France threatened sanctions. Canada's Prime Minister called it national theft. The U.S. government released a formal statement condemning the decision. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that Traoré had been planning this moment for years. Long before he became president, when he was still a mid-level army officer with a geology degree, he had quietly built a team of experts, engineers, and international partners who shared his vision: Burkina Faso must control its own resources. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was a carefully prepared move, backed by multiple backup plans. In a secure room deep inside the presidential palace, Traoré met with his closest advisors, ready to begin the next phase of their plan. The day after the big announcement, Defense Minister Ouédraogo looked worried. "Mr. President, French military intelligence has increased activity near our borders. We're hearing about mercenaries being hired in nearby countries." Traoré nodded, not surprised. "Activate Security Protocol Delta. And let our Russian and Chinese partners know, we're moving to Phase 2. Next, Finance Minister Traoré gave his update. The World Bank has frozen all development loans. The IMF is threatening to cancel our agreements. Western banks are cutting ties with our financial system. Again, Traoré didn't flinch. Use the backup banking systems we set up. And announce our new gold-backed currency next week, sooner than planned. What happened next shocked many around the world. While the West expected Burkina Faso to collapse under pressure, Traoré's team pulled off a strategic masterclass in resource management. First came a surprise. Over the past 2 years, hundreds of Burkinabe engineers and technicians had quietly been trained in mining, many in Russia and China, but also in Brazil, Turkey, and even quietly in Canada and Australia. "We don't need foreign experts to mine our gold," Traoré said in a national speech. "Our people have done the hard work for generations, they just were never allowed to lead or benefit from it." Within weeks, every major mine in the country was fully under national control. Production continued almost without a hitch. The collapse everyone expected simply didn't happen. Then came the financial counterpunch. As Western banks cut off connections, Burkina Faso launched its new currency, the Sankara franc, named after revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara, who was assassinated in 1987. Unlike the CFA franc, which was controlled by France and backed by its treasury, the new currency was backed by Burkina Faso's own gold reserves. "For the first time, we control both our resources and the currency that represents them," Finance Minister Traoré told the press. Experts around the world predicted hyperinflation and chaos. Instead, the Sankara franc held steady. Neighboring countries like Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Togo even started accepting it for trade. But perhaps the most unexpected part of Traoré's plan was his diplomatic style. Instead of cutting off all ties with the West, he left the door open, but only for those who respected Burkina Faso's right to control its own resources. When the French foreign minister threatened military action during a press conference, Traoré didn't respond with anger. He simply said, "Come to Ouagadougou. See our operations. Let's talk. But only if the New Deal respects both your interests and our sovereignty." This calm but firm approach caused a split in the Western response. France stayed aggressive. But Canada quietly opened talks, interested in technical cooperation under the new rules. Under the new system, some European countries, including Italy and Spain, signaled they were open to respecting Burkina Faso's nationalization decision. In return, they wanted deals to buy gold at fair rates. The united Western opposition that had once strongly condemned the move began to weaken. Most importantly, Traoré skillfully used international partnerships to his advantage. China, which already had major investments in African infrastructure, quickly stepped in to provide equipment and technical help. Russia offered security support and military advisors to prevent outside interference. Emerging powers like Turkey, Brazil, and India, countries with their own experiences of Western control, signed new trade deals that helped reduce Burkina Faso's dependence on old global powers. 6 months after nationalization, President Traoré invited global journalists to tour the Bissa gold mine, the same mine where he had once confronted Director Marot. The difference was clear. Where foreign bosses once sat in air-conditioned offices, now Burkinabe engineers ran the entire operation. The mine's safety had improved. And the new system gave 15% of the mine's profits directly to the workers. "We produce a bit less gold than before," said the new director, a woman who used to be a mid-level manager under the French company Nordgold. "But now the profits stay in Burkina Faso. We're using that money to build schools and hospitals, instead of sending it to shareholders in Paris and Toronto." The most meaningful change was a memorial added to the site, honoring the 23 workers who died in an explosion 30 years earlier, including Traoré's father. Each name was engraved in a stone laced with gold, a lasting reminder of the lives lost because of foreign exploitation. As time passed, the predicted economic collapse never happened. There were real challenges, like gaps in technical skills, machinery upkeep, and the need to build new trade routes. But the total failure that Western experts warned about didn't come. Instead, something new began to form, a homegrown model of resource management. It wasn't perfect, but it was proudly Burkinabe. The real brilliance of Traoré's strategy became clear in how the gold revenues were handled. Instead of keeping full control in government hands, he created a national resource trust, a public body protected by the Constitution. The trust was run by a mix of elected officials, technical experts, and representatives from mining communities. Every citizen received quarterly reports showing how much gold was produced, how much money came in, and where it was spent. "Transparency is our shield against corruption," Traoré said. "When everyone can see where the gold goes, it's harder for anyone, including the government, to steal from the people." The trust followed a legal formula for how to divide the gold income: 30% went to roads, power, and water projects, 25% to education and healthcare, 20% into future investments to grow other parts of the economy, 15% to a national savings fund, 10% directly to the mining communities. Meanwhile, the international reaction continued to shift. France kept its sanctions, but found itself increasingly isolated. As time passed, France became more and more isolated, while other countries slowly restarted relations with Burkina Faso. Even the World Bank and IMF, who had first punished the country, began to reconnect, but cautiously. In a surprising turn, some international mining companies started approaching Burkina Faso's government with offers to help through technical partnerships. These companies had come to accept that the old system was gone, and that working within the new, national ownership model was the only way forward. A year after the nationalization, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before the United Nations General Assembly. Many Western diplomats expected an angry, anti-colonial speech. Instead, Traoré spoke calmly and confidently about a new way for developing countries to manage their natural resources. "We don't reject partnership," he said. "We reject exploitation pretending to be partnership. There's a big difference." His words hit home. In the months that followed, countries like Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of Congo announced plans to review their mining deals with foreign companies. In Latin America, nations with large lithium reserves began studying what was now being called the Burkina model, as they looked for better ways to manage their own resources. But the most powerful change was seen at home. For the first time, regular Burkinabe citizens were starting to feel the real benefits of their country's natural wealth. In remote villages where schools had never existed, new classrooms opened. Rural health clinics finally had regular medicine and working equipment. Roads were fixed and expanded, connecting forgotten towns to cities and markets. Solar power projects brought light to places that had always lived in darkness. During a visit to a new technical training center in his hometown, Traoré said, "My father died digging gold that built nothing for his people. Now, that same gold is building a future for the next generation." That is what sovereignty means. The center focused on mining engineering, geology, and how to manage resources sustainably, preparing young Burkinabe to run their country's mines for generations to come. Of course, not everything went perfectly. Some mining sites still faced technical problems. Financial restrictions from abroad made it hard to import certain materials. Security threats, often tied to unknown foreign backers, created trouble in some areas. But every time a challenge appeared, Traoré's government adapted quickly, which helped keep public trust in the nationalization plan strong. 2 years after that first bold move, a French delegation arrived in Ouagadougou. This wasn't a return to the old way of doing business, it was the start of something completely different. After long talks, Burkina Faso and France signed a new agreement. French companies could help on certain projects, but only in a support role. Full control would stay with Burkina Faso. The deal was a major shift from the past. French firms would no longer extract the resources themselves. Instead, they'd receive service fees for providing equipment, training, or repairs, not a share of the gold. The agreement with France allowed them to provide technical help, but all resources would stay owned by Burkina Faso. "It's a model that respects both our skills and their independence," admitted the French Minister of Economy at a press conference, something unthinkable just months earlier. "We're learning to be partners, not owners." Similar deals followed with companies from Canada, Australia, and the U.S. Each one accepted a new reality: African nations rich in resources would no longer accept unfair, one-sided deals. This shift, known as the Gold Revolution, changed more than just Burkina Faso's economy. It changed how people saw themselves. For years, Burkinabe citizens were told they needed foreign help to develop. But now, they saw their own engineers and workers successfully running complex mining operations. Villages that had once watched their gold leave the country with no benefit were now building schools, roads, and clinics with that same gold. Internationally, Ibrahim Traoré became known as the man who started a new way of thinking about resources. But inside Burkina Faso, he gave credit to the people. "This change belongs to every citizen," he said at the second anniversary of nationalization. "No leader could have done this alone. It took the courage and will of an entire people who chose to make their resources work for their children's future." One of the most emotional moments came when Traoré visited his father's village. A new high school had been built there using money from the mines. The school focused on science and technology and had modern labs and computers. "My father had to leave this village to work in a foreign-owned mine," Traoré told the students. "But you can stay here and still help build our country's future." The Burkina model of national resource control spread quickly. Within 5 years, 14 African countries had adopted their own versions of the National Resource Trust, each shaped to fit local needs but all based on the same key ideas: full transparency, smart investments in different sectors, and putting communities first. The once unchallenged control of foreign mining companies in poor nations began to fade. Eventually, even global institutions started to adapt. The World Bank created a special team to help countries take more control over their resources. The IMF changed its rules to avoid punishing nations that nationalized their resources. And the big mining companies? Even they began offering fairer partnership deals, ones where the country owns the resources, and foreign companies simply provide support. 10 years after he first confronted the mine director at Bissa, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a room full of African leaders in Addis Ababa. Many of them had followed Burkina Faso's lead, taking back control of their resources and using the profits to build their nations. And then Traoré said something that stayed with them: the real revolution, he told them, wasn't about gold, it was about dignity, ownership, and the belief that we are capable of shaping our own future. It wasn't just about changing who owned the mines, it was about changing who benefited from what came out of them. The numbers told a powerful story. Since nationalization, Burkina Faso had gone from being one of the world's poorest countries to reaching lower middle-income status. Literacy had jumped from 41% to 78%. Access to healthcare grew from just 23% of the population to over 80%. New roads and infrastructure connected remote areas to the rest of the country. Most importantly, the share of mining revenue that stayed inside the country rose from less than 10% to more than 85%. Of course, challenges still remained. Burkina Faso still dealt with security issues, problems in agriculture, and the need to grow industries beyond mining. The country wasn't perfect, and even President Traoré admitted that resource management was only one piece of a much bigger picture. But one thing had clearly changed: Burkina Faso's relationship with its natural resources had been transformed for good. The real proof wasn't in awards or praise from other countries. It was visible across the country itself. In places where foreign companies once took resources while leaving little behind, new communities were now growing. Schools, clinics, and roads were appearing in regions that had been ignored for generations. New training centers were helping young Burkinabe learn careers in mining, engineering, geology, and environmental science. The children of mine workers, who once expected to do the same low-paid, risky jobs as their parents, were now building different futures. A miner's son could become an engineer. A plant worker's daughter could become a geologist or scientist. The old cycle of exploitation was finally broken. In a rare personal interview, Ibrahim Traoré reflected on all this, from the death of his father in a mine to the changes in his country. "I didn't set out to change the world," he said. "As a child, I just kept wondering, why does our gold make others rich while we stay poor?" That simple question, and his decision to act on it, sparked a movement that reached far beyond Burkina Faso. At the end of the interview, the journalist asked one final question: "What do you think your father would say about the Burkina Faso of today?" Traoré paused, looking out the window at the city, new schools, hospitals, and buildings built with money from the very gold his father once mined. Finally, he replied, "I think he would see that his death wasn't for nothing. The gold he died digging is finally building the future he dreamed of for his children."